everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchoreographed. I'm your host, Neve, and today we are super excited to have the wonderful artist Jools Gilson on. How are you doing, Jools?
I'm very well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on and joining us. We'll get straight into it. How did you start off in the arts?
There wasn't really that much arts around me. I loved drama at school. Everybody always said to me that I looked like a dancer, and I really wasn't, which was kind of annoying at the time. When I was about 10, I wrote to the BBC, handwritten letter, and I said, I want to be an actress. I'd like you to take me on board. I hadn't told my family or anything. I think I literally wrote to the head of the BBC. Then I got this letter back which said BBC on the front, and my parents are like, what is that? It was really kind. It kind of said, well, you know, we normally use kids from stage schools, and maybe you're a little bit young to be thinking about this. So I did that. I did a bit of drama at school. I did dance classes. I remember auditioning for The Sound of Music, which I loved. I was only about 13, but I'd had like no dance classes or anything. So I went to my godfather and learned some of the songs. I was useless at just like do a double step ball change here and do that. And I was useless. So I didn't get the part. I think I was just kind of audacious, but also I didn't really have any route into how that would work. When I did my A-levels, I've been 30 years in Ireland, but I'm from the UK. So I did A-levels, and it was in the 1980s. So very few people went to university then, like only about 10%. I didn't know if I wanted to be a doctor, so I did like chemistry and physics as well as English. Then I decided I wanted to do English and theatre and dance. Of course, I didn't get offered many places because I had these science things. So I ended up in Lancaster University in 1984 doing theatre studies and English. And it was actually extraordinary because it was the middle of the miners' crisis. And I started dancing with Ludus Dance Company, which is still going. It's a dance and education company. They did really political work. The woman who was the director of Jill Greystones, she had us like with Maggie Thatcher's masks on and wads of cash, like doing agitprop contemporary dance on the Esplanade in Morecambe and, you know, schools and things. And then the department itself, the theatre studies department, it was all people from the north, but a real commitment to kind of experimental practice. So we worked in our first and second year, I think, with a director called Peter Brooks, not the Peter Brook, but another young at the time director. But I didn't know again at the time, but he was really influenced by Pina Bausch. His work was really important at that time. In the 1980s in the UK, they did something called impact theatre. It was highly physical and very visual. So I had that kind of combination of politicised introduction to contemporary dance and also an introduction to theatre, which was absolutely not about plays on the whole. It was about devising. It was very physical. And I think partly because I'd done the work with Ludus and because I was really interested in their work, they did a lot of engaged work with people of different abilities. I'd been involved in some of that. So, I ended up getting a scholarship, which was amazing, to go and study theatre and dance in Boulder in Colorado. So that also changed my life. So I was there for 2 years. At the end of the 80s. And it was really interesting because the theatre and dance program at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and still to this day, they're not that connected, the theatre and the dance. So the dance would be quite experimental, very contemporary, really interesting MFA program. And the theatre department would be quite traditional and more of a actor training program. They have this Bachelor of Fine Arts program. So it was a real contrast. But I was there for 2 years. That was my route.
That is some route. Wow. I just can't get the image out of Maggie Thatcher mask. It just sounds incredible. I'm like, I want to see that show. I was going to ask, so when you decided to go to University of Lancaster and do arts, did you get backlash from your parents or were they very supportive?
I think it was easier for me because my mum left school at 15 and my dad left school at 16. So they had no experience of universities. I mean, that's true of a lot of families still. But my older sister, when she wanted to go to university, they made her do a course where she would come out as something. So she did speech therapy. So it was a vocational course. So it was really new terrain that I was just doing this kind of English and theatre studies. Like, what was that? But they really didn't have a roadmap. And I think it was much easier for me because my sister had already done it once. So no, I didn't get a backlash. It was a long way away. It was like Hogwarts. I went to Euston and they'd hired a whole train. I mean, the university is totally not like Hogwarts, but the fact that they hired a whole train and I had my trunk. We went up to the universities. No, I didn't get a backlash, I suppose is the short answer.
And for the application process, was there an interview? Was there an audition? What was that like?
My son is doing his leaving at the moment. So I'm kind of very keenly aware of how different it is to my own experience, where we were interviewed. I mean, there was less of us, but we were interviewed and auditioned. It was an audition and an interview, and it was a kind of a workshop. So I went all the way up to Lancaster and to other places and did a workshop. And, it was usually quite physical and vocal.
And was it the same then when you went to Colorado? Because I know it's slightly different in America. Like, how was that?
It was different because I'd got a scholarship, and the scholarship was actually only for a year, but to do an MA in the States, it's at least 2. I did most of my coursework in 1 year, which was really intense. It's just different in the States. I wasn't, I don't know why, but I didn't have an interview for that. I did have to do an exam, which is to get graduate record examinations. They were called, they're probably something else now. So I did have to go to London and do an exam to get into graduate school. But I was just finishing my degree, and then I went kind of straight away. Yeah. And I went back recently in 2021 as a Fulbright scholar with my daughter, which was amazing. I was kind of hosted by Theatre and Dance again. And my best friend is from that time, so we lived across the road from her. And my daughter, she was able to go, because I had the Fulbright, they were able to organise the visas. So she went to school out there as well. So that was really good.
Amazing. After you graduated in Colorado, did you stay there or did you come back to England?
I would have loved to have stayed, but I couldn't because I was a Brit and I just had a student visa. I mean, I could have done, but I would have been illegal. I was far too well behaved to do something like that. So I came back and couldn't get a job. At the time, I thought, I have an MA. I'll have no problem getting a job. But of course, it was a bloody nightmare. I applied for everything, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I applied for jobs in publishing, in art centres, and very sadly, I have a folder full of all my job applications, which then were letters, all the rejections. So eventually, the one job I got was, I got this job. It was only for 9 months, wasn't even a whole year, but it was at Hull University in the drama department. So that was my first job. Although in that intervening year, I worked in a school for a while, but I also worked as a runner for a television company, a kind of local television company, what was it called? MasterChef. It was starting. It was like the first MasterChef. So it was good food. And then off I went to Hull, which was like joining the Scouts, because I was the only woman on the staff, and all of the men were between 20 and 35 years older than me, and they called me Twinkle. That was the first time I was teaching contemporary dance, and I did kind of women's playwrights and did productions and things. There for 2 years. I went to Dartington, and I was a lecturer in theatre there, which also has a very strong history of dance. Like, it's where contact improvisation started. And at the time, it doesn't exist anymore, but it had a really rich history before that. Post-World War, it brought all these Jewish artist emigres. It's a beautiful estate in Devon. And then that became the college. It was very much not a university. It was very much about training artists. Lots of really important, interesting artists came out of there. And it was all about interdisciplinarity, collaboration and experimentation. It was like doing another degree, even though I was teaching there. So that was great.
How for you was going into being a lecturer? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I'm a bit of an accidental academic, in the sense that, as I mentioned, I applied for loads of jobs before I kind of got the job in Hull, which started me in kind of that kind of academic route, even though Dartington wasn't really. It was more of a kind of training centre or training college. How have I found it? I think a lot of artists really struggle with precarity. It's a very real issue. It's given me kind of stability. It's also been quite challenging. I was 3 or 4 years in Dartington, and then I came to Ireland in 1996. So I've been here 30 years. For the first 20 years, I was in the English department at UCC. Again, it gave me financial stability. It supported my work, not overtly. There was no strategy to support artists at that time. There is now, but artists within the kind of academy. I struggled with being in an English department in the sense that it was all literary based, and I did teach kind of theatre and practical theatre, and so a lot of movement was part of that. And then I carried on with my own work separately as the research. Kept my own practice. Yeah, it was hard during that period, and as I say, I do think that has shifted. I tried hard to find people to collaborate with within the university, and I didn't manage to do that at that time. I always felt like a bit of a fish out of water. For many years, I taught big lectures, first year English lectures, which were sometimes to 300 and 400. And I teach kind of an intro to drama. And I also took big chunks of time out. We had 2 big commissions for the European Capital of Culture 20 years ago in 2005. I took 2 years out for that. I took another 3 years out because I had become a mum. And there was a scheme during the 2008 to kind of 12 economic crash. There was a scheme whereby public employees could take leave of absence. So I did that. So that's kind of 5 years. The other thing I'm very grateful for is to have the support of captive leave and things like I'm doing at the moment, which is that I have a sabbatical, which is an incredible privilege. So it's been mixed. But then in 2016, got a different role. So I'm Professor of Creative Practice at UCC. For the first 4.5 years, I was head of the School of Film, Music and Theatre. Well, it was music and theatre initially, and then we brought film in. So that was a really different role. It was very much about management and supporting colleagues, advocating for creative practice. So that was really good, but challenging too, and it was a different role. The cost was really my own practice. I really didn't have time to kind of keep that sustained. And, you know, sometimes that happens, maybe even quite often, which is when you're successful within an academic context. The kind of indicator of success is management and administration. And I was very clear after I had done that I didn't want to do that anymore. So I had then a year's sabbatical, and that was when I went to Boulder again. And rekindled my practice. And since then, I've just been really clear that my own practice is really important to me and my work. And so, yeah, that's where I am now.
What is your practice?
Okay, so my practice is interdisciplinary. I suppose at the core of it is always movement and choreography, but the writing very much comes out of that. For example, I performed in Mary Wycherley's Weathering in 2023, and I wrote text for that, but then I performed those texts in the live performance. The project that I'm working on right now is called Tempestries, and it's a project that I've been working on for a number of years, and it's based around a bog skeleton and all of her clothes found in County Roscommon in 2005. I've been kind of writing into and around that for a number of years. And at the moment, I'm collaborating with a composer and digital and filmmaker called Benjamin Burns and a textile artist called Veronica Santorum. And we're also collaborating with the Tyndall Institute and in UCC, and they are engineers, and they're working with us to develop ways to haunt sphagnum moss with stories and textile maps that will kind of document some of this. So this is kind of working towards an installation version. I've done 2 sets of R&D, one in Boulder, Colorado as part of the Fulbright, and another one as part of the Dance Bursary, which I got in 2023. And for that, I worked with Justine Cooper and Siobhan Le Guineen, and we did a sharing at Firkin Crane. I'm going to apply for funding this year to see if I can do the dance theatre project. But just as an example of how my work kind of moves across dance theatre, writing, and the visual arts. So one of the it's 20 years old now, but I made a piece in 2005, which is a big collaborative piece called The Knitting Map. So that's been touring in the States. It's just come back, actually. So from 2021 to 2024, and it's had 3 exhibitions. So that's been really amazing that piece from 20 years ago still has a life, because it's in this new exhibition called Mapping Climate Change. And I was in West Virginia in October last year, and it was such a joy to see it and just to engage with young people and older people as well, but mainly young people around it and what it is. And all these women from the north side of Cork City hand knitted this, and that they were knitting the weather.
Would you say it's dance performance more so than performance art, say the likes of Amanda Coogan?
No, I think it's definitely dance theatre rather than that kind of performance art. I have shown in those kinds of contexts, but mostly it's been dance theatre context, and the funding that I've got has always been through dance. So even going back 20 years. I needed a job. I'd been married a New Zealander that I'd met in a swamp in Louisiana, and I'd married him 4 months later. And funnily enough, it didn't work out because we didn't know each other and we didn't really like each other. So the 4 years in Devon were that period. And the contract I had at Dartington was 3 years, and then I stayed another year to kind of start my PhD. And the marriage was over and I really needed a job. So the job I got was as lecturer in English brackets drama at University College Cork. So here I came. I didn't plan to stay for my whole life, but here I am. Ireland's been very good to me.
Amazing. So did you do your PhD in Devon?
I started it at Dartington and then I transferred to the university because my supervisor didn't have a PhD and I was, it was a bit bonkers. So I transferred to the University of Surrey, which at the time was a big centre for dance. Like, it's taken a bit of a kicking since, but it was one of the first places, or I think it was the first place in the UK that did practice-based dance PhDs. I did theatre and performance studies, but there was a big dance element in it. So my PhD is from Surrey in the UK.
Do you mind me, what was your PhD in?
My PhD was focused on women who write texts and also perform them. And it was specifically focused on orality and mouths and female orality. So I am also one of those people who writes texts and performs them, myself with dance a lot. And that's what it was about. And it was because it was an early time for practice-based PhDs. Like, I supervise them now. And now, the practice counts as a substantial part of that. And then the written part is usually around 30 to 40,000 words. But I wrote a PhD thesis the same length as everyone else, so about 80,000 words. And then I had like a concert length dance theatre performance. I had the format doesn't exist anymore because it's too dated, but it was a CD-ROM, which is like a digital artwork, which had like 80 sites on it as well, and then different texts.
When you became a mother in the arts, how did you navigate that? How did you balance that, and as an academic as well?
Question's really important. I was a mentor with Laura Murphy, and with her piece, it's partly about being a mum. It's hugely challenging. So what I did, I took 3 years out of academia and started making radio because I couldn't do what I'd been doing. I couldn't do touring. I couldn't do dance performance. I couldn't be any kind of a mother and do that. But I really wanted to tell the story of adopting my children because it was a bit of a challenge. I didn't know how to do that. And I wrote, I would get like maybe an hour or two a week to write. At the time, there was this thing on Lyric FM, Quiet Quarter. So they had a structure where it was for 5 days. And I think it was 10 minutes a day over 5 days. And it was an audio piece for radio. And I thought, I could do that. So I very carefully, over many months, kind of constructed a piece of writing which was telling the story of my kids' adoption over 5 days in 10-minute chunks. I'm a mum, so I've no bloody time to do anything. I'm changing nappies and running after little ones. And so I sent it off to Lyric, and then the producer rang me and she said, thanks, they're really great. She said, but we've stopped doing that. I was like, okay, you could have emailed. So then I was in a rush, I was doing something, and I just sent it off to RTE, Liam O'Brien. He rang me and he said, got your writing? And he said, yes, it's really good. He said, but it's not what we do. And again, I thought, if you're going to reject me, would you just like email me? But he said, would you be interested in making a documentary? And I kind of thought, I said, yeah. So he came over and did me a quick training on this radio equipment. Of course, I wasn't new to writing and speaking my text. I was just totally new to radio. And I quickly realized that I couldn't be any kind of a mum and be interviewing. So I just stuck it in the middle of the kitchen table and it was on record. So I was a new radio maker, but it meant that I got lots and lots of really good material because there was so much, but then there was so much of it. So anyway, that piece was called Los Preciosos, and it did really well. And I made a couple of other radio documentaries with them. I did a kind of arty piece for Lyric FM with a composer called Sebastian, oh my goodness, I can't remember his last name. And then I did one for the BBC. I did a Radio 4 documentary in the sense that I felt a strong need to continue to make work somehow, and I couldn't. It was really hard to do dance practice. So apart from dancing with the kids.
Would you have any advice or maybe even Jools, advice for your younger self of someone who was trying to get into the creative industry, the arts sector?
I think the most important thing is to learn to trust your artistic vision, and to take time, whatever that discipline is, to really take time to nurture that and to find ways to language that. That isn't always easy. I love words and I'm a writer, but for many artists, I think that's a huge struggle. And so I think also even collaborating with people about languaging what it is that you do, what it is what's distinctive about that, and just developing a practice. It's really interesting because I work across visual arts. I exhibit, show things in galleries. I wouldn't call myself a visual artist, but I really like those spaces. But what is interesting is that in terms of the training for visual artists, students are trained to have an individual practice. And that's the core of what visual arts practice is. And they go into the studio and they do their own practice. And there's that confidence about what it is. I mean, people might not always be confident, but that's a really strong part of that discipline. That's not true of dance, and it's not true of theatre. I think we need more of that sensibility, and to encourage young and emerging dance and theatre artists in particular to find a way to have a daily practice that isn't just about warming up and sustaining, but is about nurturing a creativity. I think we've something to learn from visual arts about that. The other thing that I would say, it's really important to take your work seriously, but it's also really important not to take yourself too seriously and to have a little bit of a twinkle about what you do. Now, it's easy for me to say that because I'm older and I've done lots of things and various things, but I've always been a bit irreverent, and that's allowed me to just start to make radio or do something in a gallery when I've never done it. Or it doesn't always work because obviously many artists spend their lives developing a practice in a particular discipline and establishing themselves within a particular discipline. And it's really hard to be constantly moving. But for example, if it's helpful, just I have a dance theatre-y CV summary, and I have a textile one because I work a lot with textiles, and I have an academic-y one. That ability to kind of shift and depending on context is super important. And also to say the not knowing what you're doing is actually a hugely important part of any practice. I feel strongly that you need to be willing to sit with not knowing, at the same time being able to kind of write a version of it to get funding, And I know that feels like a complete contradiction, but it isn't actually. And it's interesting working with the engineers because, of course, their methodologies, they struggle hugely with the idea of us having an idea of something but not knowing entirely exactly what it is because we're making it as we go. And that's terrifying to them, but that's a huge learning for them, that being willing not to know and using strategies of playfulness and exploration. That's why art is important, because it asks different kinds of questions. So we really need young and emerging new artists, and we need different perspectives to assert that contradiction between knowing and not knowing, and still being able to kind of blag about it without it completely seeming like a lie. It's interesting because I think that dance and theatre are not very good at naming the extraordinary skills that we have to the wider world. Because sometimes I'm in contexts outside of the arts within the university, and they might be talking about a new methodology or a different way to do things. And I kind of think, that's what we do all the time, and they are often to do with things like improvisation, playfulness, coming at things from a different angle, being able to frame things in a profoundly different way than they've conventionally been seen.
In terms of applications and funding, how do you go about them? What advice do you have?
I think it's hard. I think I have a privilege in that I have access to some other kinds of funding because I'm within the university system. So the funding that we have at the moment is actually from what was Science Foundation Ireland. Now Science Foundation Ireland has become Research Ireland, but that's through the Tyndall, and we've got 2 tranches of that kind of funding. Arts Council funding, I was absolutely thrilled to get the Dance Bursary. I just felt really supportive of the work that I was doing, and that was really excellent. And then I wasn't successful at getting a dance projects funding after that. I'm going to try one more time, but I'm also very aware that there are many, many people in Ireland whose full-time work is making dance, and it's not my full-time work. I would really, really like to finish this project, but it may be that I have to finish it in another way. So I think in terms of funding applications, it's really important to get support around writing, if that's not your thing. But I also think it's really important to develop relationships and venue relationships, collaborative relationships, partnerships with dancers who are willing to kind of write lovely letters in your application and all of those kinds of things. And I think the most important thing is to remember that Ireland needs you, needs all those new and or established kind of dance artists and theatre artists. We need new voices and new ideas. I know it can feel sometimes hopeless trying to fund work and trying to support yourself in other ways, but I would just really encourage people to keep trying and to also be alert to other ways of doing it. I don't have any neat answers for what that might be, but I didn't expect to kind of be working with engineers and get funding to support dancers to do that, but I have. That's because I'm within the university system, but it may be that you work for an organisation that has some kind of celebration that maybe they would be interested in supporting some dance. The other thing to remember is the percent for art scheme, which has often in the past been a sculpture. So that's when there's a public building and 1% of the cost of that public building has to go to an artwork. And increasingly, and maybe we don't as dance artists and theatre artists think about that enough, because there's nothing stopping that being a performance or a film. So that would be another suggestion, is not just be looking at dance and the Arts Council all the time, obviously at your local authority as well, but to look at the visual arts percent for art scheme, because I think there's a lot more that dance artists and theatre artists could be doing in that realm.
This is kind of going on to our kind of final question, or you've kind of already started answering it. If you had a magic wand, what would you like to see the Arts Council in Ireland fund, or any schemes, bursaries, mentorships that aren't available anymore but were really effective, or even maybe in Colorado, in the UK, that would really work beneficial here?
It's interesting because I've been around long enough that I've had all kinds of different named fundings, things like the Interdisciplinary Collaboration Award. I got a critical one, like a writing critical one. I tried to see if I could get this going, but it didn't really work. I really think that there's an opportunity, and it's true of the universities as well as Research Ireland, which includes the Science Foundation Ireland, is to orchestrate more opportunities for dance artists to collaborate with scientists and other academics. And to, as part of that, to educate both sides about that the artists are not there to tell the story of the science or tell the story, that it isn't just about education and outreach, that actually the methodologies and the skills and the diversity of practices within dance and theatre have a huge amount to offer to science collaboration and other, not just science, but other forms of academia. There's many contemporary crises, but in terms of the climate crisis, that feels hugely critical. And I think the work of Creative Ireland in their funding of climate projects, which have all been about engaging with communities, that project of Creative Ireland has already been extended, so it will come to an end quite soon. So we need really blue sky thinking nationally about how we rethink ways for dance and theatre artists to engage with these contexts in ways that really matter, not just a lovely little project for the sake of it, and that can be absolutely community engaged, but can not be as well, that actually are just about the kind of artwork. So for me, that would be one of the biggest things. And in very small ways, I model some of that. So I've done projects where I've commissioned dance artists to work with scientists at UCC. I've done two with a dance artist and plant scientists. But, that needs to be scaled up because, there's such a huge contrast between how science is funded in this country and how the arts are funded. Dance bursary of 20,000 is a huge amount for anyone, right? For Tyndall, we've got 2 lots of 20 grand, and that's a tiny project for them, as an example. I mean, we're hugely grateful, obviously, but yeah.
That is incredible. Thank you so, so much, Jools.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure to meet and talk to you and learn so much. Thank you so, so much for everything.